Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of the
Geek
Buddies.
Hey! As you can tell from our intro, we're going to take it a little bit low key today. You know, normally when we do our show, we do like 3 geek news items, take a little bit of a break for our podcast listeners, and then jump into a main topic. But with everything that's been happening this week in our world and out in the streets of maybe some of your cities, for those of you who are watching us right now, we felt it maybe wasn't the appropriate time to be jumping into geek news items or film news items or TV news items or anything that is necessarily topical in terms of a production going on right now. So we thought we'd jump in more and have a discussion about representation. The Black Lives Matter movement has certainly been consuming our media and our press, and certainly a lot of film and TV studios and websites and a lot of places have stepped forward to support the movement in such numbers that I've never seen before for any movement in my lifetime that I can recall. I mean, maybe the Me Too movement kind of comes close, but still, you didn't see a lot of people outside the entertainment industry pushing that forward as strongly as you seem to see now with Black Lives Matter. And so we thought it would be a good time to sit down and the 3 of us just have a discussion about it. We've been friends for 20 years. You know, we've had numerous discussions about movements like this and representation and stuff like that in the world of geek, both film and television and otherwise. And we thought this would be a good time to do something completely different and have an open and honest conversation. And maybe some of you all listening to us will hear some of your points or have some of your points discussed here between us on the show. I am one of your hosts. I am John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, and host here in Los Angeles, California, and CEO, I like to say, of the Outlaw Nation.
Whoa, that's new. I like that. I am Michael Vogel. I am a writer and producer of animated TV shows and movies and CEO in my own mind.
You actually have a production company. Don't start that. Next.
And I am Shannon McClung. I'm an animation writer and a television actor where you may have seen me on Teen Wolf, My Name is Earl, and House. And I have no acronym title to speak of at the moment.
Not yet, but that usually means you're probably going to start McClung Productions late in life and make a crap ton of money.
McClung Co.
Just rolls off the tongue is what it does.
You can have that one for free. McClung.
I always said, some people have names that just roll off the tongue. I feel like Shannon McClung get more kind of trips and stumbles.
Well, but
it gets there. It gets there.
It gets there eventually. You stick
like
the landing.
Shanny Mac is good. What about Shanny Mac Holding Company? Holdings. Shanny Mac Holdings sounds good.
Knick-knack Shanny Mac. I like it.
Yep, I like it. Let's Michael, please start us off here.
No, I did this last week, but I think last week I was like, how's everybody doing? And a lot has happened between now and then. So how's everybody doing?
You're asking if you're asking us, I'm doing okay today. I feel weird today. Like Tuesday, I was really despondent and just down in the dumps about everything. I felt hopeless almost. But as we've seen less of the overall violence that was happening over the weekend, day by day, I find that I slowly start to fill my hope canister back up again. But today is weird. Even eating my food, I didn't know what I wanted to eat today. I didn't know what I wanted to do. It's a very strange day today, but I don't necessarily feel sad, but I don't feel happy either. So I'm just kind of in this place of existing today. I would just say I'm existing today with a little bit of dread that something might happen this weekend, and I'm hoping that it doesn't. That's what I would say.
Yeah. The past few days have been they've been a lot, and it's weird because my little building, my little complex that I live in, my neighbors, I wouldn't say we're friends, but we're certainly friendly. There's always a hello. There's a quick, how you doing? But I mean, we live in a pretty diverse little complex. It's 2 straight white guys, 1 straight Latinx guy, 2 gay couples, and 2 African-American women. And Yeah, I mean, one of the women is actually a DJ, and I want to say it was the first night that Burbank, where I live, had a curfew. She generally on the weekend will play her music, and I mean, she's a professional DJ. She's very good at what she does. And this week, I mean, I opened my door and just kind of let it come in. She and I had a quick conversation of, "Hey, how you doing? How you doing?" Right. Yeah, I mean, as someone in my place, you know, straight white guy, I'm just trying to listen right now. I mean, and I feel like, you know, I've seen a couple of videos where I've donated to a couple of funds, but for the most part, I'm just trying to be present and just listen.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, it's been crazy. It's been a roller coaster of emotions for sure. I think that I think that in general, everything we've seen in the past week with the protests and the marching and the riots and the looting and everything has been a lot for anybody to take in. And I think, though, in addition to that, having all of that come directly near the tail end, however you want to talk about it, of a global pandemic where we've all been locked up and everything's been closed. Like, you know, it felt like we were kind of nearing the end. I know a lot of other cities have already started opening. LA was right on the bare edge of starting to reopen. Yeah. And now you walk outside and, like, you know, yesterday I was walking back from one of the protests and, you know, on the street on Santa Monica Boulevard where I was walking, like every store was boarded up with plywood. Yeah. People were marching on my right. There was police sirens on my left. There was helicopters flying overhead. And I looked at my friend and I was like, kind of feel like this is where we're at for a while. Like, I think this is that we were living in a new normal of this quarantine life, kind of questioning what was going to happen. And now we're in like a new normal as we're protesting and demanding change and everything. And it's for anybody, it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of feelings. I feel like I'm on a constant roller coaster. Kind of, Johnny, to your point, I'll go from feeling really hopeless and feeling a lot of despair, and kind of, Shannon, to what you're saying, feeling a lot of questioning what I should be doing, like how I can be a good ally, how I can listen, like what I can do to help further this cause and be a good ally. And I'll feel like really overwhelmed and feel despair. And then I will turn right around and I'll start to feel hopeful. And like one little thing will make me feel great. One little thing will make me feel crazy. I've felt myself being a lot more tense with everybody, with my friends, like getting in, you know, like little things will upset you and set you off because we're all just barely holding on. Yeah. So it's been a crazy week. And I know, like, we talked about this because when we were like, well, should we even do a show this week? Yeah. Is it appropriate? Like, does anybody want to talk about geek stuff? And I do think, Johnny, to your point, you know, you were the one that kind of said, you know, talking about representation, which is something we've brought up before on the show, is definitely a piece of the bigger systemic racism issues that are being brought up, that I think that's one small area that we can talk about, that I think that there is a lot that we can say in that arena when there's so many other pieces of the puzzle that are being discussed as well.
Yeah, it feels like this has been building for a few years now. You know, this idea of the placating. I mean, since we started making jokes about the token black character or the token Latino or Asian or gay, that conversation started, I think, a couple of decades ago, you know, or maybe a bit longer. This idea of noticing, you know, what happens to black characters or black actors in certain roles, or people of color in certain roles, and how they become like, used as token. Hey, we're inclusive because we have this one character that we don't give much to do, but is there. I think it was more inclusive in TV than it ever was in film. And I think the thundering cry that has gotten louder over the last few years is that film has to start catching up with how they represent people of color, and specifically black men and women, in their media, how they show them, how deep into the culture. Do they have to only be in a quote unquote black movie to be able to see the culture of black people? You know, and I think that's something that's gotten louder and louder. And we've moved past this idea of including or casting people of color and moved into, no, not just cast people of color, put people of color in roles of complexity and depth and legitimate affectation or effect of the overall main storyline. And I think this has been what led to Black Panther in the MCU. No, it's we heard already. I can't. What was it, Ian, whatever his name is, or Ike Perma, whatever it was, that didn't want to go into making gay characters in the MCU. Didn't want to lean too heavily into the people of color as a main character. We saw that happen, and eventually the door kept banging from a white man, Kevin Feige, to make these changes, to make it more representative of our society. And that's the thing. At the end of the day, this movement is not about making people feel terrible. It's about highlighting what the problems are and asking them to become allies to fix it. Because by fixing it, we all live in everything we said America was supposed to stand for, a more equal society with representation in the media, reflective of the society that you actually live in every day. And I think that's what is being misconstrued by certain people on who have a certain bent to go with it, to twist the narrative of this a little bit to make it seem that it's all violence, all violence. And I think that's that obstinate, stubborn ignorance that is frustrating to watch, because Black Panther is a fantastic film. Captain Marvel, not a great film, but Brie Larson did a nice job in this role. And it's time we started seeing more of this stuff throughout our media. And I think the public actually is ready to see it. It's only these loud minority of people who are trying to crap on it for the most part.
Well, I think you're right. I think that, using the MCU as an example is good. I think that the question of how these stories are being made, how these stories are being told is important, because I think that the reason that you end up with tokenism, as you were talking about, here's the checking off the box of here's a Black character in my story, here's a gay character, here's a Latinx character, here's an Asian character. The reason that happens is because the stories are all being told by white people for a primarily white audience. So the idea of checking a box to say, look, we have diversity, we have representation, that it was something that was well meant, that has been a way that has kind of kept these stories down. The reason that Black Panther is such an amazing movie is that Ryan Coogler told that story from a Black perspective. Yeah. And he was allowed to tell that story from a Black perspective. It was not a white writer and a white director kind of telling, hey, look at this cool guy. He's the Black Panther. He's neat. Isn't that awesome? They kind of went that extra mile, and, all due credit to Marvel and Disney for sitting back and listening to what Coogler said and said, yes, we will let you tell that story. Because that's what makes Black Panther a cut above a lot of other superhero movies, is that it's actually about something. It's about the Black experience in America. It's about Black exceptionalism. There's a lot of really, really interesting things that a white person wouldn't necessarily be able to bring to that story. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say it was really interesting. If you think back to one of the post-credit sequences of Civil War, when Bucky is going under in Wakanda, and you see the way. And it's a very small set, but you see the way a Wakandan lab looked through the lens of partly the Russo brothers, partly whoever their production designer was, and there was nothing wrong with it. It looked very futuristic. But then when you got into Black Panther, and you got to see what Coogler and his production designer did with Shuri's lab, and you got to see maybe what a more accurate portrayal of this, what it would have been, and you can see the differences there. And those are the differences that are important. I know I've told you guys this before. I don't know if I've told it before on the podcast, but I mean, one of the things that I think myself, one of the things that I just didn't pay attention to for the longest time was minority representation. And I remember, as our listeners know, as our audience knows, I used to play John Connor in the Terminator 2 3D show. And there's a moment where the character's running off the stage, and there's a big 3D effect with the T-1000's head coming out, and the audience is wearing 3D glasses, and it's a big 3D theme park moment where everyone kind of ducks. And I remember one day, and this would have been in the late 90s, when I was running off the stage, and there was a Black family down front, and the T-1000 head came out, and they reacted like everyone else did. Jut down, they were laughing, they were smiling, and that was the first time it really at least for me, when I realized, like, God, there's nobody who looks like them on stage right now.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if does this bother them? Because they're clearly having fun, but I'm like, I wonder what it would be like if they had more people to look like, more performers that look like them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point too, Shannon, because in the world of sci-fi and in the world of fantasy, there hasn't always been representation in the main franchises or the main big movies that you see. And it became a running joke that the black character always got killed off for effect to help the emotional story continue in or become deeper in the sci-fi film that you're watching or the fantasy film that you're watching or even the action adventure film that you're watching, you know, and there's not a lot of black sci-fi or black characters in sci-fi that you could turn to. There's Uhura in Star Trek, you know, in Star Wars. It isn't until John Boyega shows up. Oh, I mean, you had Lando, I guess, but Boyega's it was pitched as one of the main characters and the main storylines. Lando was on the side. Jimmy Smits on the side as a person of color in the prequels.
You had Sam Jackson, but he was a big movie star
with Mace Windu and all that. Yeah, but then Sam,
this kind of just like underscores the point is that when you look at, because you're right. I mean, look, any level of representation is good. The fact that we have an Uhura, that we have a Lando, a Mace Windu, that's great. That's awesome. But the underlying issue there is it's a person of color just showing up in a white person's story. And again, Black Panther is not that. And I think that's what makes Black Panther such an important piece of where we need to be going, is that it's not about, and, you know, and like we already have enough trouble. You just have to look at social media, is anytime you have a main character show up in any of these major franchises, be it Star Wars or the Marvel Universe, or, you know, when you God forbid you change an ethnicity of a character that's been in comics for 60 years, and all of a sudden you have all of these people coming out saying that it's social justice for social justice sake, and like, why are you changing this thing? Like, why don't you like you just see that, like, no matter what you do, there's this response to it. Yeah. And at the end of the day, that's not even as far as we need to push it. Like, we need to see these other people's stories from their perspectives, not just them showing up. Like, it's great. Like, Uhura's great. Mace Windu's great. But like, Uhura is in Kirk's the captain, and Kirk and Spock and Bones. That's the main relationship. Right. The Star Wars movies, the Skywalker family, the white family. Even, you know, Harry Potter, like the core cast is it's a bunch of white wizards, and Hogwarts is a very diverse school. Yeah. But, you know, in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, when they opened it in London, the fact that they cast a person of color as Hermione, people lost their minds as if that was the worst thing in the world. And so, you know, we already have such a barrier in geek culture that anytime you try and push any level of representation, more women, more people of color, more LGBTQ people, it's already met with such resistance that to get to the next level, which is we need a sci-fi saga where the main character is a person of color or a woman or an LGBTQ person or all three. Like, you know, the fact that and I'm going to say this, and everyone, if they're being honest, is going to say that sounds crazy. To see a giant sci-fi movie saga that the whole world is excited about, where the main character is a black trans woman, you can't even conceive of that now. Like, that is something that's such a hard thing to wrap your head around, because you can automatically hear from, like, a black trans woman, you could hear the objections from every side. Yeah. But there is a black trans person of color out there right now that loves fantasy and loves sci-fi as much as every other person that does not get to see themselves represented. Mm-hmm. And is basically told subtly, you know, through every experience they have of this stuff, that not only are they not really a part of these fantasy worlds, but they don't get to be the lead. They don't get to be the main character. Yeah. And that's a hard thing. And I think that part of systemic racism and part of what these marches are about, and part of what this is about, part of it is about the police response. Part of that is about redlining. Part of it, like, there's a bunch of political issues that seem like they are monumental to overcome. And there's a lot of people that are way smarter than the three of us in those respects, that are fighting some fights on all of the things that we need to be voting for and all the things that we need to get behind. But in our little world of entertainment, that's where you get to see yourself represented as a hero. That's where you get to see yourself be the person that's fighting the oppression. And for a long, long time, people of color have not gotten to see themselves in those lead roles.
Yeah. I like what John Hoey said. As a friend of mine, he was one of the co-hosts of the Resistant Broadcast podcast that they do, great Star Wars podcast that they do. He said, I wonder how many people, and I think I'm paraphrasing here, how many people went back into their Twitter feeds and deleted all their negative comments about John Boyega and Star Wars and are now all of a sudden hashtagging Black Lives Matter, or out there in the streets protesting, who were on the message boards bashing the idea of having a female lead in a Star Wars film, or having someone like John Boyega in, or making a Black Panther movie, stuff like that. See, the Black Lives Matter movement is not liberal against conservative. It isn't. It's a human issue, not a political issue. And all political spectrums have been negligent in accepting representation overall. And that's what this whole movement is just trying to highlight. And how many times you cast a woman? Oh, you cast a like in Dune now. Dune is predominantly a white cast. And you have this black actress who's coming in to take the place of the character, I think, that Max von Sydow played in the original, I think.
Yeah, I think it is.
And so people already were like, and already that kind of crap comes up. That stuff needs to die in our sphere of liberal geekdom, or whatever you want to call us. That stuff has to die. If the creators cast a person of color or a woman in a certain role, they are trying to expand the acceptance and the viewpoint of this product. And 9 times out of 10, recently, they've knocked it out of the park by making these decisions. And I don't mean by the overall product, because you can argue Star Wars films good or bad. You can't argue Daisy Ridley's performance. You can't argue that John Boyega doesn't give what he's got in those roles, or Oscar Isaac does great stuff. Diego Luna as Cassian Andor, we'll see what he does with that series. So you're seeing that they're making the right decisions in terms of casting. The overall product is the overall product, but the performance from the people they cast is good for the most part, if not 95%. And that's important to note as well. For as much of the complaints are, these people bring it because they know they've got a heavy mantle to carry to create this stuff. And now we need to see, which I love about The Mandalorian, with Rick Famuyiwa being involved in the first season. Now we're starting to see Deborah Chow, a woman of Asian descent, right? You've got Bryce Dallas Howard, of course, a white woman, but still a woman. You've got all these different people.
A white woman, but she's still a woman.
I'm saying, but I know we want women of color. But
she's a ginger. She's a ginger.
Well, sure.
Dangerous.
I can't say ginger. But like you look at the stuff and you go, okay, this is more representative of our society. And I get that there's a fear, that seems to be underlying, and let's speak about it. It's a little bit underlying of the fear of, we're going to lose our representation. But that's not true. It's this is a predominantly white society. So if you go from 75% to 65%, you're still the majority, or even 70, which is really what would happen. You're still the majority. Yeah.
But also, like, who cares about that?
Right.
I mean, like, I know people do. So obviously this is, I was watching, I can't remember his name because I don't give a shit about him, but like one of those like white supremacist guys who's always spouting off at the mouth. But like, this idea of, whites will be in the minority. It's like, okay, like, fine.
Right. But it'll never happen. It'll never happen. And even if it does, I agree with you, Mike. Even if it does, what's the big deal? Because people have been able to survive with white people in the majority. So if other people are in the majority, guess what? White people, you'll survive. You'll be. But
I feel like that idea of saying, "Hey, white people, don't worry. Even if you go from 75% to 65%, you're still the majority. So don't get so worried." It's like, we need to get to the point, and I think we are there. Like, I think I'll be a little bit optimistic for a moment. Like, I think that the fact that movies like Black Panther, movies like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, any of these, like these movies that come out where there could be any kind of fear, like, are the white people going to come? Like, they clearly do.
Yeah.
And yes, you have that vocal group on social media that is going to crap all over anything that doesn't fit their view of what they think these geek movies should be. But the fact of the matter is, like, people of color, LGBTQ people, women for years, we've all had to go see these movies. And when the lead is a white, straight, cisgender dude, we have all had to imagine, well, I could be that person. Like, every person of color, every minority, every female has had to watch these movies and go, okay, it's a given that the lead is going to be a white, cisgender, straight guy. So I'll just go ahead and accept that. And I'll still pretend that I'm Captain, seeing little girls dressed up as Superman or Luke Skywalker or whatever. It's like, that's great. You get to pretend. White, straight, cisgender men can pretend too.
Yeah.
You can go, and I don't mean that as I get over it. I mean, I've seen it happen. I have lots of friends here in LA who are white straight couples who have their white cisgender straight children who like Miles Morales more than Peter Parker. Like, It is not this leap. Like, people, I think older generations have this idea that it's such a hard thing for kids to grasp. Kids care way less than adults who have grown up in societies that have systemic racism have. Like, it's easy for a kid to go, I think Miles Morales is awesome. He's super cool. I want to be like him. Right. And I think that getting to that place, not getting to the place of, hey, white people, don't worry, you're still going to be in the lead. It's like, if that's the way you're looking at the world,
fair enough.
Stop and get off. We don't care. We don't have time for it anymore. I'm over it. I'm over it. Over it. Shannon,
as the white representation on this show, do you feel that you got to get over it? Tell me the truth.
I mean, for me personally,
does that stuff? Let me ask you. I mean, because Shannon, you're a pretty wide open guy. Does that stuff bother you?
You said you're a pretty white guy.
No, wide open guy. Do you care about this kind of stuff? Like, when you see someone catch, you go, does it excite you? And then you go, okay, let's see what they can do. Or do you feel an intrinsic fear? Like, wait.
I've never gotten upset by it. No. Yeah. No, nowhere near. Again, this, I know this is something I brought up before, but Aquaman's my guy.
Right.
When they cast Jason Momoa, I was like, man, that makes perfect sense. That's someone who's a Pacific Islander, someone whose people have a relationship with the water. I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And he went in and killed it. No, like, whenever that's happened, Michael Clark Duncan being cast as Kingpin, I'm like, God, that makes perfect sense. The first quality about Kingpin, I would think, is you want a big guy. And he was a big guy. That doesn't take away from anything that came before in the Daredevil comics to me. And it doesn't mean that, okay, well, only black guys can be Kingpin now. No, I mean, then Vincent D'Onofrio came and did a different performance just as good. I mean, that stuff has never bothered me personally. When I saw sort of the reaction to Rogue One lead, Felicity.
No,
not Huffman.
Was it Felicity Jones?
Felicity Jones, yes. The reaction to her being the lead on the heels of Daisy Ridley and John Boyega being the leads. Again, that stuff, I'm like, hey, that we've not seen that before.
Yeah.
Great. Let's see what this story turns out to be. No, that stuff has never bothered me.
It's mind-blowing too when you look at it, because it's like all these people who love Leia, some of them were like stepping up going, wait, why are we getting another female lead? It's like, wait, do you love Leia? Or like, what's the problem here? Like, it's that kind of thing. We all got to take a look at ourselves. And I think that's what's important, because although the three of us can sit here and talk, the three of us have probably had to take some look at ourselves during this whole process as well, taking moments of, hey, where do I do that it's inadvertent or that I'm not aware that I'm doing it? And certainly when the Me Too movement blew up, that was a big wake-up call for me, because of how I had, flirted with girls before in the past, or kind of pursued women in the past. I didn't know that some of the things that I'd been like taught or I'd seen before could be seen as, not necessarily the most, the best way to go about flirting with somebody. When you think about that, there are 20 other dudes doing the same thing to a woman who's attractive. that was such a massive wake-up call for me. I had an old episode of the Outlaw Nation way back when it was a podcast with Clark Wolf, and Clark explained when she explained the like what that process is like and what it feels like for a woman. My mind went like, oh my God, I didn't even think about it because I'd been so trained by society to be, you have to be the pursuer. You have to be the pursuer, right? That's what, so I hope the same thing is happening here for all of us, not just people who are listening to us, but us as well. Like where are we, what do we need to kind of take a look at or open up about or become more educated on and evolve? I think that's really the thing that I feel the best about in this movement is they're just asking people to listen, be educated about something and evolve. They're not looking for, now every movie is black. They're just saying like, we want you to listen to us, understand, get educated and evolve.
Yeah. And I think Shannon said this at the beginning, and I think this is the most important thing is the best thing we can do right now is listen. And the best thing, and again, I'll take this back to sort of the geek analogy of like, I was thinking about this a lot as everybody's been marching and protesting. Most of the movies and the franchises and the brands that we talk about are stories of revolution, are stories of rebellion, are like we are like, whether it is, Luke, Leia, Han in the rebellion, Rey, Poe, Finn in the resistance, Harry and the students of Hogwarts forming Dumbledore's army to stand up against Dolores Umbridge, Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games, like sci-fi, fantasy, everything, like superheroes standing up for what's right. We live in every movie we talk about every week. When we're excited about this character or that character, we are talking about characters that are standing up against inequality, standing up against injustice, standing up against this authoritarian government. Like it's the same story over and over and over again. And every single lead is white.
Yeah.
There's other characters there, but everyone is white. And I think that as we are living through this movement, the hardest thing and the thing that everybody has to remember is that, yeah, we've been trained by these movies that there's a revolution. Let's go jump in and let's be the ones leading it. And we're not leading this. Like our job, as Shannon said at the beginning of this, is to listen.
Yeah.
Is to say, I am here and I am on board for this. I am ready. I've been trained my entire life. The Wizards of Hogwarts and the Rebellion and everybody have taught me I'm ready to fight this fight, but I'm not the lead.
Yeah.
This is not Luke Scott. This is Lando Calrissian's story. This is the moment when we sit back and say, I'm not the lead of this movie. I'm the supporting role. This is your story. Tell me what I can do.
Yeah. And I do believe the fan. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Shannon.
No. I was just gonna add to that because there was something, and I don't recall. It was probably on Twitter where when people are asking you to listen, people are asking you to take that moment. When they're saying listen, they're saying try to understand what we're saying, where we're coming from. Don't listen with the intent to reply. Listen with the intent to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this generation and the last couple of generations have been receptive to these changes. Yeah, there's been the loud minority on YouTube and social media and what have you, but it doesn't affect the box office numbers. Like the people are going in droves. Captain Marvel over $1 billion, Black Panther almost $1 billion or over $1 billion, and then getting nominated for a best picture. So I think and Star Wars made almost over $2 billion. I mean, that stuff speaks volumes of the fact that the people who are complaining about it are actually in the minority. And the people who are receptive to it, who don't give two shits about it and just want a good product and a good film or a good TV show, that's the majority mentality. It seems like if you look at the results financially from these films that have taken or made these decisions. And that gives me hope, actually. The fact that there were more protesters out there after you tear gas them and shoot rubber bullets and do all these things, the fact that even more protesters come out the next night, that gives me hope. That makes me feel like this is a movement that is not going to be stopped anytime soon. And it isn't like a Me Too movement where it happened online and then studios immediately reacted to it and made changes. That was just kind of in that room of entertainment. This is all over the world. People are marching all over the world, and it's just to get people to make the changes that are systemic that need to happen. And these film studios who come out and kiss their own asses with these statements, and these, websites that come out and kiss their own asses with these statements. I mean, we just saw, or these actors, we saw Leah Michelle get the tea spilled all over her a couple of days ago, and her have to apologize. Today, the former co-anchor with Billy Bush came after him about Black Lives Matter as well. She said, "I'm so glad you finally came aboard. Maybe talk to the co-host of your show for 12 years. You could have started with her." And that's the guy. So already people are like, well, what did Billy do there? His white privilege. Could have checked your white privilege at the door when we co-hosted a show together. So I like that people are not afraid anymore to call other people out and call other studios out. And they need to be called out. I mean, Mike, I know you're a big Disney guy, and I love a lot of the Disney products, Marvel and Star Wars and all that. But, on that side of the fence, there's more change that needs to happen. And hopefully they're listening. Princess and the Frog can't be everything they go back to every time.
Right. No, I 100%. And I think you bring up a really good point. I think that I can speak to this kind of from personal, I obviously, spoiler alert, I'm gay. Don't know if you've picked up on this listening to the show or not.
For you new listeners, Michael is gay.
To new listeners, but so one of the things that I really feel impassioned about and try and do as much as I can is, as I'm developing shows, as a person who is lucky enough and privileged enough to be in a position where I get to pitch shows, I get to develop shows, I get to do some really fun stuff. I'm always trying to make sure that I'm including LGBTQ characters so that the world that I'm creating reflects the world that I'm in. I also think it's important to have a diverse cast of characters, strong women, people of color, and everything else. And I can do that as a showrunner. I can do that. And the people that are in power at Disney, at Warner Brothers, at Universal, the directors, the writers, the producers, the executives who are white, absolutely should be doing that. Anytime you're working on a show, it's not just a token, like, let's have this character, but how can these characters be the leads in the stories? But that only goes so far. The other piece of this is, and this is where you have to take a step back, is I can be the most liberal, most wonderful, most accepting person in the world, and it can include a rainbow coalition of characters in my shows. And we'll always try and do that. But I'm still a white dude. I might be a gay white dude, but I'm still a white dude. And I'm not the one who can tell that story as well. If I'm going to make a character a black lead, I would do that. I would do that in a second. But there are other people out there who might not have been as privileged to be as lucky as I am to end up in the position I am, who can tell those stories better. And it's finding those voices, it's elevating those voices and letting them run with it. Like I can be an ally as far as I can be an ally. But the best way that I can be an ally is to find those voices and help to give them those opportunities too, because they can tell a lot of stories better. I can tell a lot of stories really good. And especially when it comes to stories that reflect the LGBTQ experience, I can do that all day long. And that's something that we do need in our society. And that's something that needs to happen. But elevating those people of color, like finding more people who are going to be writers in animation, directors in animation, designers in animation, executives in animation, who have not had those experiences, like that's what we need more of. And I think that's where a lot of the people running these studios start to get a little bit nervous, because the ultimate thing that you can do is step aside and let somebody else do that same job. Yeah. And that is, I think that's the tough pill to swallow, is you can be the most liberal, most amazing, greatest ally in the world, but you got to make room for the other people that aren't there yet and let them run with it for a while. Give them the ball and let them run with it. Sports analogy. I did it. Boom.
I like that. Good job. Good job. You do run with the ball in sports. It's very true.
That's true. So one of the few things I know about the sports, you run with a ball.
Hey, Mike, which sport do you run with the ball specifically?
You run with it in football. You dribble the ball in basketball.
Nice.
And in soccer, you kick the ball as you run, but no hands.
Right. No hands. Very clear. But within the genres is the next step, right? I mean, we're starting to see in our something like DC Universe's Harley Quinn. I thought that was fantastic. I think that show is fantastic. It really kind of blows the doors off a lot of things that you wouldn't normally think would be tackled. in a situation like that, an R-rated animated show. It's pretty incredible and exploring all these issues. I look forward to the PG show that explores all these issues as well and makes them palatable and acceptable and part of normal everyday life. Because guess what? There are gay people, trans people, people of color in your normal everyday life. In most cities that exists and you can see it. And in the 80s, and I'll be honest with you, in the 80s, 70s, 60s, I'm sure it was a thing to be made fun of, right? That's what they made fun of you for. Were you gay? They made fun of you. Were you heavy? They made fun of you. Were you a person of color? They made fun of you. Were you handicapped? They made fun of you. Or mentally handicapped? They made fun of you. There's all kinds of, and all of that has changed, so much, so powerfully so. And I like that this has been the truth about this country. And I've said this on another podcast too, or another show is, regardless of what you may think about the United States, we are a progressive country. We eventually progress. And that's been the truth throughout the years. On this particular issue, it has morphed in different ways as we've moved on as a society, technologically, and as a people. The issue has morphed and changed as it gone along. But it's always been at the foundation, the idea of equality and representation in our world equally. And it doesn't mean that it has to be like 50-50 or anything like that. It just has to be, more opportunities have to be available and have to be made available. So I hope that a lot of these studios are making these statements who have a terrible record of hiring people of color, maintaining people employed of color, or doing projects with people of color, open the door to kind of make this more of a possibility. And yes, some of those people of color should be allowed to fail, just as numerous white directors and producers and actors and writers are allowed to fail numerous times as they go on in their career. People of color should be allowed to fail. And this goes across. It's also in sports as well. You'll get a white coach that gets rehired 500 times, even though they're terrible at every stop they go in, because they occasionally have a minimum level of success. Whereas a black coach, a majority of the time, if not all the time, only gets one or two chances, and then they're out of the whatever league they're in. And so that's kind of what has to change across the board everywhere, So, and that's equality. If this person gets 30 chances, I should get 30 chances. There's those kinds of things that need to kind of, especially if my record is the same, or if my quality of product is relatively the same, I should be allowed the same chances. And that's been the argument. Went from two all men in the joke room or whatever, the writers' room, to we need more women in the writers' room. Okay, more women. Now we need people of color. And I want to say this, maybe I'll get in trouble. I don't think just hiring white people who are women, or white people who are, I don't know, handicapped or whatever you want to say nowadays, is the line, the minimum line that needs to be set for you to be considered a diverse company, or hiring gay white people. Like, it has to be people of color. That is true diversity. Hiring multiple people from the same color is not diversity. It's not, in my opinion.
And I think from a bigger standpoint,
is my point. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think that, because this is sort of the way the conversation goes. Oh, you should hire more. We should see more diversity in a writer's room. We should see more diversity in the boardroom. We should see more diversity. And that's 100% true. Like, we should. When it comes to geek culture, when it comes to the things that we are talking about, that's a piece of it. But the bigger piece of it is we need new stories.
Yeah, new stories.
We need stories that reflect, we've talked about this a ton. We are living in an era where we are taking all the things that we loved and we are rebooting, recycling, rethinking, reimagining. And that's where we run into these problems, because most of the characters, particularly in comics, that were created in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s that we still love today are white and straight, because that's the world we lived in. Great example. And I know we've talked about it a little bit on the show before, but one of the movies that Lucasfilm has in production right now is a film adaptation of the book series Children of Blood and Bone by Tommy Adeyemi, Black woman.
Right.
And this is a perfect example of sort of like what I'm talking about is, Johnny, you said this earlier, like when you think of a fantasy geek genre movie, like a, you know, whether it be a Harry Potter or a Dungeons and Dragons or anything, it's all based on sort of a white Eurocentric version of what we think of as the past. Yeah. So it's Europe, it's castles and knights and maidens and horses and dragons, because that's the white Eurocentric version of what fantasy is. Yeah. And that's the beginning of any fantasy story. So even a fantasy that has a more diverse cast, it's sort of that world. What Tomie Adeyemi does in Children of Blood and Bone is she creates a fantasy world that is much more based on sort of an African kind of world. Everybody is black. It's much more like the creatures, the magic, the geography. It's all very much based on Africa, and it creates a brand new kind of fantasy world that you've never seen before. It feels new. It feels fresh. And there's no white people in this story. It is a black fantasy story, and it's amazing. Like, I read it, I loved it. I can't wait to see the movie. But that's what I mean. Like, so to your point, filling the boardroom with people and having a diverse executives, diverse writers, diverse whatever is important. It's essential. But the bigger part of that is letting those diverse voices create the new worlds and the new stories, so that, you know, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40, 50 years, when our three children are doing Geek Buddies, the reboot, like that when they're talking about their versions of Star Wars, their versions of the Marvel Universe, their versions of Harry Potter, these are stories that have not just a diverse cast of characters with a white straight lead, but like completely reimagined different worlds that come from different perspectives and different experiences. That's the goal. The goal is to, like, much bigger than just, let's make sure though that the looking around the writer's table, it's a nice balanced view. It's like, it's really reshaping the types of stories that we get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, and this idea, and Shannon, I get your thoughts on that. And this idea of like, well, shouldn't we hire the best person for the job? Of course, in a perfect world, yes, but we do not live in a perfect world, and that statement needs to go the way of the dodo. It is an incorrect statement based on an incorrect presumption, which is that everyone has a fair opportunity to achieve and get to these positions. They don't, for a number of reasons: educational, environment, class, economic situation. There are numerous people who've climbed out of the worst situations who are white to get to their to get to this position, right? But majority of the time, it's not that way. And so it's like, it's not that way for people of color. It's not that way all around. It's the frustrating part of this whole thing, is that this idea that, well, you know, the best person for the job.
And even beyond that, whenever that comes up, look, yes, like white people in general are given all of the, like that's where the privilege comes in. The opportunities are there. The networking is there. The people that you know, it's all there because of the shape of the entertainment industry. Right. But beyond that, that's an inherently racist statement. Like the idea that even with all the privilege and all of the struggles and everything, like the idea that the best, well, we got to hire the best person for this. Right. Like, is this idea that like underneath, but that's probably a white guy.
Yeah.
That's probably a white guy. And a white guy is not always the best person for the job.
It's very, very, as we've seen many, many times, where the white guy is not the best person for the job.
Unless it's a really funny role, and then Shannon is always the best for the job.
Of
Shannon,
course.
you look at that face. Look at that face.
But this is, I mean, Shan, this is something you encounter, right? As an actor, you're like, there has been a stronger push for roles that you have usually gone out for to get representation in these roles.
Yeah, and it's a challenge. It's absolutely a challenge. After, I think it was 2017, after the Oscars So White campaign that happened afterwards, there was a very big push for diverse casting. And as for someone who was kind of on the making some forward mobility, that did slow down. And it was hard, and it continues to be hard, and it's okay, I think, to be like, God, that's but at the same time, some actors that have never been given the chances that I was always given are having the time of their lives, and for me personally, I'm like, I can't get upset about that.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, would I like to go out for more roles? Sure. There's plenty of roles that I thought I should have got that went to white dudes.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, but it's also sort of not even sort of like it's necessary.
Yeah. I mean, how many people of color have had the same feeling for decades in the entertainment industry? Sure. I'm a better actor than that guy. I went in for the same role and they didn't cast me. They said they wanted gender or the colorblind casting, and I went in and it was the only black guy amongst 7 other white dudes. And I've seen that happen. Me being the only Latino guy in a room full of 9 white guys. It's happened. And they just bring you in to fit that quota mark, but not to really consider you for the role. And that's the thing, right? And so how many, yes, some, and I think this happens across the board, some people for employment in any industry are like, why is that person getting hired over me? I blah, blah, blah. But it's like, yeah, welcome to the other side. And I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying the pendulum swings back the other way sometimes, and then eventually settles into the middle. And that's the way our society has always been. And so it's, and some people have to take the hits for that, just like other people took the hits for your ancestors when they were getting all the, the roles or getting the jobs or getting the opportunities that people of color's ancestors couldn't get. And so those are those things that, like, there has to be more perspective in approaching issues like this rather than what's in front of my face. I think that's what, me personally, that's what I push for, is more perspective amongst the entire thing. Because I know sometimes, and I'll say this, I'll probably get in trouble for this too, but sometimes the younger generation thinks they discovered activism, that somehow it didn't exist beforehand. And it's like, no, we've been doing it for quite some time. And even Rex Chapman today shared a great episode from the Munsters, where Herman Munster literally says everything that we've been talking about on this show. This idea of it doesn't matter if you're black or white or yellow or purple. It just matters the size of your heart, and it matters how much you want something. And don't let anyone ever tell you that you can't get it. And it may be harder for you because you look different, but it doesn't mean it's not possible, right? And so it's like, even back in the 60s, they were dropping those lessons. And they've been dropping them since the 1800s, for God's sakes. And that's the thing that people have to have perspective. This is not a movement that just all of a sudden popped up. This has been building for centuries in this country. So.
Yeah. I saw something. Let me see if I can find it really quick. I'm not going to be able to find it. I saw something on online. I think I posted it that I've been thinking a lot about, and I think this really applies to where the entertainment industry at large and geek culture specifically can go, which is, this idea that maybe we've all been talking about how 2020 is the worst year ever because holy shit. But maybe like 2020 is actually going to be a great year. Maybe 2020 is the year that everything got so bad that we rethought everything and changed and went in a drastically new direction. And I think that we've spent so many years now talking about, well, it's a female Jedi, or it's a black superhero, or it's this, and it's taking all of these. It's a gay person a gay person showing up in the Marvel universe, and like. Right. And look, I've said this, I love living in the era where we're seeing all of these universes that we get to talk every week about, Harry Potter, Marvel, DC, Star Wars, wash, rinse, repeat. Like, we've got all of these great things to talk about. But instead of saying, as we come out of a multiple month quarantine and protesting and rioting and social change and all this stuff, rather than saying, well, now let's get back to normal and see how we can take all of these people of color, people of different backgrounds, and put them into the stories that we've been telling over and over and over again. Yeah. We have an opportunity right now to create something better. We have an opportunity right now to allow different voices to step forward and create new worlds and new universes and new kinds of superheroes and new kinds of sci-fi and fantasy that aren't just let's make a black Batman, or let's do a female Jedi, but like really radically rethinking and changing things, and creating something really new and fresh that is cool and fun, and we can geek out about it, but also important in the way that it's telling new stories. Yeah. And I mean, like, that's like, look, I don't know that that's going to happen quickly. I don't know that that's going to happen rapidly. It would be great if it did. It would be great if we just came out of all this and you were like, fuck, we got all these new things. But I think that that's the goal that we should be aiming for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I've said this before. You guys know this about me. It's cool that Miles Morales exists. It's cool that what's his name, Javier Reyes? Is that who does the Blue Beetle?
Jaime Reyes.
It's cool that exists, but you're taking over something a white man already created, and or lived in, or was the original character, Ted Gordon Parker. I want my own Latino superheroes, born from the ground up, who hit the mainstream and are just as and excites the fan base just as much to see a film version of it, or a animated version of it, or a TV show, live action TV show version of it. That's what I want for myself personally, speaking as a Latino. And I hope that happens across the board as we move forward past this. We're getting Shang-Chi, and that's great, but where's the Latino stuff? We got the Black Lives Matter, we got Black Panther, we got Captain Marvel, we got Shang-Chi. Where's the Latino stuff? So hopefully down the road that comes for us as well. And I think us being a part of this movement and supporting this movement is a movement, is the the next logical step behind this movement is the Latino stuff. Like, where are we going to be represented in sci-fi and fantasy a little bit more? I love what Star Wars has done, obviously, but I'd like to see more being done in other franchises. There's no Latino Avenger. There's no Latino wizard. There's no from Harry Potter, and not even in Fantastic Beasts. And so this needs to hopefully be the next step after the Black Lives Matter movement happens and makes changes and systemic changes. And then, we get to kind of get our moment as well. Or we don't even have to have a movement. Maybe people just go, hey, we need to create this too. That would be nice, where we didn't have to march in the streets to get that representation as well. So yeah, we'll see. That's why I love this movement. Honestly, I think the genesis of it is for equality, and what you said, Mike, to hear more voices creating things. And that's great.
I'm really excited, and just along these lines, Gay Pride has been pretty much canceled because large gatherings in the era of Corona, big like that's not going to work. But of course, with all these marches and protests that are happening, they just announced this past few days that instead of Gay Pride being a parade and a big festival, which was already canceled, but instead of it also being canceled, on June 14th in Los Angeles, Gay Pride is now going to be replaced with a march where the LGBTQ community is going to march for the Black Lives Matter movement, and with the Black Lives Matter. So they're turning into this big march because the LGBTQ movement is a movement of intersectionality. Like everyone who's LGBTQ is white, male, female, Black. I mean, the entire reason we celebrate Pride is to celebrate the Stonewall riots, which was started by a Black trans woman. Yeah. So I think that, kind of to your point, dealing with the systemic racism that people of color deal with in our country it's an important thing for us to be allies. It's an important thing for us to, as Shannon said at the beginning of this, sit back and listen, see how we can be helpful, see what we can do. Yeah. But at the same time, raising up any of us raises up all of us.
Yep.
And it makes for a better society, and it creates new opportunities and new worlds for us to explore in the bigger political spectrum, in the real world, and also in the geek world that we get to talk about every week. So I think that, to your point, that's right. I think that seeing the success of these different kinds of heroes being told from different kinds of perspective, whether it be Black Panther, whether it be Shang-Chi, whether it be other things that we haven't even seen or heard of yet, will allow us to have the Latinx experience, like the other experiences, and see those types of movies and stories being told as well.
Yeah, down the road we can hope, right? That's all we can do is hope it happens and goes forward from there. All right, I think this is a good place to stop. Shannon, any words you want to say to kind of add on to this, or you feel like you've said what you need to say?
All I can do is just reiterate the stuff that I said at the beginning. If you're someone like me, just listen, and don't expect your friends who happen to be people of color. It would be great if they tell you what you can do. It's not their job to educate you. Take the initiative. See if you can support a Black artist. See if you can support a Black-owned business.
Great point. And could you stand up a little bit and show the people the new merch? Is that what you're?
This just happened to be in my T-shirt rotation.
Oh, look at that! Look at that!
That was my ever-expanding gut because of the quarantine. That's why our faces were folded there.
I like that. We got to make those available for people. Michael was very kind to gift us both of those for Christmas. So thank you, Michael. But we need to make those a little more available, I think. Michael, guys, any final words? We can wrap up here. Shall we wrap up or do our spiel here?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think just as far as final words, I've talked plenty. But I think that, as far as final words, it's just I really kind of am embracing this idea of let's not get back to normal. Let's create a better normal. And I think that that's true of the bigger world. I think that's true of just for me and my personal experience and looking at what my life is going to look like coming out of this. And I think in the geek universe, I think that using this as an opportunity, not to say, why are they forcing this down our throat? Why are we doing this? But just really creating a new experience that expands what the geek universe is for everybody.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening to our episode here of the Geek Buddies. And I hope we kept your attention. I hope we entertained you. I hope we educated you as well. I felt like we should do a show this week just so we can address the topic. We've never been afraid to address any topics that have come up during our run of the Geek Buddies or year-long run of the Geek Buddies when they've come up naturally and organically in stories that we're covering here. So I thought it was important for the three of us to do that. And I'm glad Michael and Shannon agreed and did this. And I hope you all who are listening to us or watching us feel that way too. Feel glad that we did this. And hopefully some of you feel a little more inspired or a little more, educated or motivated to go learn more or to participate or to understand the other side or take a moment to take a listen and understand the other side a little bit better. Shannon, what do we got to tell them?
Yeah, if you'd like to follow us on social media, on Twitter, it's @geek_buddies, on Instagram, @the_geek_buddies. If you'd like to follow me on social media, on Twitter, it's @Shannon_McClung, on Instagram, @Shannon the Geek Buddy. If you'd like to follow Mr. Vogel, it's @MKToon. If you'd like to follow Mr. Rocha, it's @The Rocha Says.
My man, Mike.
Listen, everyone's dealing with a lot this week. I don't want to put more on your plate. I don't want to stress y'all out, but sometimes you feel good. You do something nice. If you're looking to do something nice, something you can do is retweet us. Something you can do is post us up for somebody else. Say, hey, while we're dealing with all this, check out these guys. They talk about some fun, geeky stuff. If you're listening to us right now on Spotify or Anchor or iTunes or anywhere where you're listening to these podcasts, give us a rating, give us a comment. It helps us go up. If you're watching us right now on YouTube, definitely subscribe to Johnny's page. Definitely leave some comments and some feedback. We love reading it. We love just carrying on this geek conversation. And that goes for anything, particularly as we talk about, representation, tokenism, and how we sort of fix a lot of the things that we need to fix in geek culture. Super happy to have that conversation with you guys. So hit us up and let's continue the chat.
Absolutely. Can't echo those comments any more than I already do. So thank you all again so much for joining us here on a special episode of the
Geek
Buddies. Hey!